Anthony Davis has struggled greatly as a shooter ever since the NBA bubble, where yes, he did hit some big shots for the Lakers en route to an NBA championship, was a pivotal player for them in 2020, but since then, he has not shot the basketball well at all. If you look at his three-point volume, he has yet to shoot better than 28.2% from three since that run to the championship in the bubble. And now for his career, Anthony Davis is a sub 30% three-point shooter, especially for someone who doesn't want to play center. This is a little problematic for team spacing, and it's not just the three-point volume. Obviously, that's a great place to look at stretch big man play to begin with, but in the same stretch of time, so post-bubble, Anthony Davis has shot just 41.1% on shots from 10 to 16 feet away from the hoop, and then on long two-pointers, which are 16 feet to the three-point line, he has shot just 37.1%. The points per shot value is just not there on these long mid-range jump shots, where he's shot about 28.3% of his total shots in that same time span. And if you look at his entire career, he has been a highly ineffective jump shooter, so much so that I honestly believe that Anthony Davis is quite literally the worst high-volume shooter in the entire NBA. I hope you guys do enjoy today's video as we break down some trades for Anthony Davis, what that value could look like, what do I expect a trade to materialize for the Dallas Mavericks, and who are some possible landing spots for Anthony Davis. If you guys do enjoy, again, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content, because I'm really excited for this video. Not only are we going to take a brief look at some of those jump shots from Anthony Davis, talk about the difficulties that those provide. Now, there's a lot more to Anthony Davis's game. I've done breakdowns on AD in previous videos, so if you want to see some positivity around Anthony Davis, you can definitely go check that out. But this video is going to be a little bit more doom and gloom than most, because like I said, Anthony Davis is just quite literally one of the worst jump shooters in the entire NBA. He doesn't garner or draw hard closeouts, and I think specifically the opening night game against the San Antonio Spurs was a really great example of this, how the Spurs, even against Anthony Davis, who you would think in theory should be the Mavericks' best player at this point in time, the Spurs gapped and sagged off of him with Victor Wembanyama, leaving these long closeouts that they were not worried about on opening night. And because of that, they were able to show extra bodies in the paint. They ended up obliterating the Dallas Mavericks, and they lived with Anthony Davis taking open jump shots because they're not that worried about the long-term math equation that points to for the Mavericks offense, because it's not going to be very efficient offense here. Anthony Davis working off the dribble. Victor Wembanyama, not even really that worried about him. It's an Anthony Davis air ball from about 18 feet. And the thing is, even if he makes some of those shots, like I said, he's around 40% over the last 4 or 5 years or so. Even if he makes that shot at a 40% clip, that's about 0.8 points per shot, which is horrible offense. If you had an 80 offensive rating, assuming no offensive putbacks or rebounds, it's just flat out brutal. It's bad. So teams are going to live with this kind of shot from Anthony Davis, and I think this is an important part of the trade discussion, because not only does Anthony Davis miss so much time, but over a quarter of his shots, 28% of them come from long twos, and then you're also looking at about 10% of them coming on three-pointers. So about 38% of his shot diet is extremely inefficient and ineffective. And that's something you have to be aware of. Not only does he get injured, miss a lot of time, but when he is healthy, about 2 out of every 5 shots he takes are super inefficient looks for your offense. He is honestly a worse jump shooter than Russell Westbrook. And we all know what Westbrook's name is, his nickname. This is not much better from Anthony Davis. In fact, it's actually worse. And his inability, or his unwillingness to play center, I think even compounds this a bit more, because the rarity of stretch big men in the NBA who can actually reliably knock down threes as a center is just very rare. So Anthony Davis, who wants to be a power forward, has always said he wants to be a power forward, in today's game where threes are not necessarily king, but toward the top of the totem pole for what your team needs to do and make and shoot to win, Anthony Davis is actually a pretty tricky fit, given how much time he misses, how big his salary is, and how bad of a shooter he actually is. So despite all of his other talent, ability to handle the basketball as a big man, his ability to score at the rim, he's one of the best rim finishers in NBA history, around 75% within 3 feet of the rim, for his career, which really hypes up and amps up his true shooting percentage and field goal percentage because he's so good in that area. I just wish we could bottle that up and make that like 78% of what he shoots are shots at the rim. The reality, though, it's just not how it is. So let's look at a couple of trades. I've got a bunch of different frameworks to talk about here with a bunch of different teams. And Mavericks fans are probably going to be a little bit disappointed about the returns in these, but you have to hear me out. These are, again, beginning frameworks. Maybe there's an extra pick or two one way or another. We'll talk about it. But I think trades with teams that have other issues going on is probably the most sensible way to go about an Anthony Davis trade. For example, this deal with Atlanta, which cannot be made right now, which you'll see why it says failed here, is because of the recently signed restrictions on both Kennard and Dante Exum. So when trade season really officially begins, these trades will be executable. But at this point in time, it's not at the time I'm recording this, so this would be, a month or two from now is when you would look at seeing a trade like this made. And it's really twofold here. The reason that the Atlanta Hawks make this trade, Trae Young has a player option for next year. They did not come to an extension this offseason. Trae Young has voiced a little bit of discontentment with that fact, the fact that he just didn't really feel valued by the Atlanta Hawks organization, and the Hawks have been playing well without Trae Young. Now, do I think that's super sustainable? I do not, but given the fact that they've played well, maybe the front office, ownership, and I know ownership's all in on Trae Young there in Atlanta, so this would be a big decision for them to ultimately come to, but maybe Onsi Sala, who hesitated giving Trae Young an extension, could look at himself and say, hey, our defense has been really strong this year. We have a chance to go out and get one of the top 10 defenders in the world in Anthony Davis. Now, it's kind of a weird fit, but part of the idea here is the Atlanta Hawks do have stretch big man play. Onyeka Okongwu's in the middle of the best season of his NBA career. Kristaps Porzingis, of course, has been hit for his entire career an awesome stretch big man. Anthony Davis's fit as a 4, I think, makes more sense in Atlanta here, especially since Jalen Johnson can probably slide down the lineup. You're then looking at a starting lineup that's very long, big, defensively oriented with Dyson Daniels, Zachary Reese-Shea, Jalen Johnson, Anthony Davis, and then one of the two centers. So you've got a ton of size. You're extremely long, big, tall. I'm kind of talking myself into this for Atlanta. Now, Anthony Davis comes with his own litany of problems. And for Atlanta, you're getting about 5 years older. Very similarly, right, we saw Anthony Davis traded for another guy in that 2018 draft for Luka Doncic. Now Trae Young would be the one that moved for him. Now, if I'm Atlanta, I'm not personally doing this. And for Dallas, the solution is clear here. You get someone who can be a high-volume pick-and-roll ball handler. He probably makes a ton of sense next to Daniel Gafford, Derek Lively, in a, albeit lesser version of Luka Doncic. You at least get someone who can be a high-volume ball handler for you, run pick and rolls at a super elite level, one of the best passers in the entire NBA. And I think that will open the floor up for everyone else, including Cooper Flagg. And then hopefully you get buy-in from Trae Young to be more of an off-ball mover when he doesn't have the basketball, setting inverted pick and rolls for someone like Cooper Flagg. I think there's a lot of creativity Jason Kidd could work with as long as Trae Young is willing, which that is a big if. Again, there's damaged parts on both sides here. Trae Young is not a top 10 player in the world. Anthony Davis is a top 15-ish player in the world when he's healthy, but that's very rare. There's just issues on both sides here in this trade, which is why these two teams talking to each other about a deal does make some sense in my opinion. Talking about damaged goods, let's go talk about the Memphis Grizzlies, who just things haven't been right. Ja Morant struggled with off-the-court stuff. His play on the court hasn't been up to his usual standards. He's not shooting the ball very great to start the year. Now, I do think he's still the Grizzlies' best player at this point in time. He's really one of the only few players who can actually create off the dribble for everyone else. Now, they do have some players like Ty Jerome who, healthy and when they're fully in the lineup all the time, should make an impact. And that's part of what Memphis is betting on here, is you wash your hands clean of the Ja Morant situation. You give up one of those Orlando Magic first down the road that you acquired in the Desmond Bane trade, and you give up Brandon Clark for salary purposes. The Mavericks, in this 2-for-1 trade, send Anthony Davis to Memphis. The Grizzlies become a huge, giant team that can pivot throughout their starting 5, especially in the front court. You can start games with Anthony Davis and Jaren Jackson Jr. as the 4-5 combo. You can have games where you try and play maybe super massive against some of the bigger teams in the West. I'm not sure if that's super valuable, though, with Zach Edey and Anthony Davis and Jaren Jackson Jr. The big MO of the story, though, is Memphis would have elite front court play. They would have depth for when Anthony Davis misses time. You just slot back to your current starting lineup with Jaren Jackson Jr. and Zach Edey as the 4-5 combo. And the Grizzlies would be interesting, right? They have some players off the bench who can handle the ball right now in Ty Jerome, Scottie Pippen Jr. Those guys get thrusted into bigger roles. You're betting on the breakout continuance of Cedric Howard, who's had an awesome rookie season for them. And it's a really drastic shift, but one that maybe makes some sense. I'm a little bit lower on this for Dallas than I would be the Trae Young trade. John Morant just significantly a worse pull-up jump shooter and not quite the passer even that Trae Young is. And those two things I think are very central to what Dallas should be looking for is perimeter shooting, someone who can be a real threat out of the pick and roll game as both a pull-up jump shooter and a passer, which is why Trae Young, I think, checks a lot of those boxes, whereas John Morant, even though I like John Morant still as a player, I think he's undervalued. He doesn't check all of those boxes, and there are some concerns that I would have for Dallas spacing-wise, but I still think Morant to Dallas does at least hold some weight, and if the Mavericks can get a future first-round pick to open up even more flexibility for them moving forward, it's an added plus in the trade for sure. Memphis, it's a big bet on size. Not really sure the Grizzlies should actually do this or will do this. Again, it's just an idea framework. This is probably my least favorite trade idea of the bunch, to be completely honest with you. The next one I want to talk about is a huge gamble for the Philadelphia 76ers, but it could be one that drastically reshapes this team. And we've talked about Anthony Davis not wanting to be a center. Well, there's going to be a lot of missed games in this front court, but the Sixers pivot from Paul George, who has done nothing but miss games for them. And even when he's on the court, I think he's actually hindered the 76ers and especially Tyrese Maxey. The future for the Sixers is going to be Maxey and Edgecombe. Right now, the present is Joel Embiid, and they might be able to tie those two things together by improving now while getting off of Paul George's contract for just someone who's flat out a better player than him in Anthony Davis. You also get Dante Exum here as a little bit of depth in your backcourt, moving off of Andre Drummond because a lot of those minutes are now going to go to Anthony Davis, and you obviously have a Dembona as well. So the Sixers front court would be, I think, very strong with AD, Embiid, and a Dembona. From a trio standpoint, if they're all available, all healthy to play, that's obviously going to be the big question mark of this trade. But the Sixers turn a huge net negative in Paul George into something that, at least when he's on the floor, has real value for them, especially defensively. Embiid and Davis together would be really scary. The 4-5 combo as, 45 action, inverted pick and rolls, even 5-4. You could do a whole bunch of different fun stuff. And I do think this would open up more offensive rebounding for the Sixers. They'd play bigger. They'd match up better with teams like Cleveland and New York in the Eastern Conference when it comes to trying to keep Mitchell Robinson off the glass, trying to beat Jared Allen, Evan Mobley. Having this extra size, I think, would be very strong for Philadelphia. And again, I'm just completely out on the whole Paul George thing. But for the Mavericks, even though I know Mavs fans are going to say, oh, well, if you're all out on Paul George, we don't want him. Trust me, Mavs fans, I get it. I'm a Mavs fan too. I don't want Paul George, but what I do want are some of those Clippers assets. And in 2028, they would get the Clippers' unprotected first-round pick. Could be extremely valuable. And they get a swap option. Right now, Dallas owes their swap option in 2029 to Boston. This would be an added wrinkle into that swap option. So even if Dallas has to send their pick to Boston, they could then send the Boston pick to Philadelphia for this Clippers pick. So it's a really valuable swap in here too. Daryl Morey and the Sixers make a really aggressive bet trying to win now when the East is wide open. At this point in time, they take a huge gamble on Anthony Davis and get out of the Paul George contract. It is a lot to give up, so Sixers fans, if you're against this trade, I totally understand. Let me know in the comment section below what you guys think about all these trade packages, by the way. But I totally understand if you're against these trades. It's hard finding Anthony Davis trades that make sense because, again, some of the negatives about AD as a player, missing time, poor jump shooting, all of that stuff, makes it really hard for me to value him at a high level. And at the same time, if you're Dallas, this is who you got back for Luka Doncic. So it's going to be difficult to really navigate a trade that I think actually makes sense for both parties in an Anthony Davis trade. That's what we try to do here, though, with the Charlotte Hornets. And this is one that I think actually is kind of sensible. The Hornets have to love what they did in the 2025 draft. I was a huge fan and believer in what they were able to accomplish on draft night, drafting winning players like Ryan Kalkbrenner, Sion James, some veteran-type prospects, guys who had multiple years of college experience and very good college experience. They've been real additive pieces, and then they hit an absolute home run in the top 5, drafting Con Knipple, a player who I loved a lot in the 2025 draft class, Thought he was going to bring a lot of stability, scoring punch, and team dynamics to Charlotte, and that's exactly what's happened here. And while the Hornets haven't been winning, you would think a trade of some of their lesser important long-term pieces for Anthony Davis could completely reshape what this team looks like. And very similar to when the Clippers did trade for Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, it kind of marked a shift in the viewpoint of the franchise. When the Clippers made that decision to get Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, yes, they gave up probably too much, too many picks. They gave up Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. In hindsight, it hasn't worked out. But now the Clippers are viewed as a destination. And Charlotte, who has been honestly abysmal for a majority of my lifetime, going out and trading for Anthony Davis with new ownership and some really solid young pieces, this could be kind of that marking in the sand of, hey, we're trying to be a legit team. The East is open this year. Let's try and get into the playoffs and maybe we can win a series. I know that's not super exciting, but the downside here in this trade isn't that enormous for the Hornets. They are giving up Miles Bridges, who I think is fine to give up. They're giving up Colin Sexton, which should help the Mavs backcourt a little bit. Pat Connaughton's an expiring salary. One of the things I love the most about this trade for Dallas is you're getting some short-term expiring money here in Sexton and Connaughton. So if you want to work with flexibility around Cooper Flagg's rookie contract, you can probably pivot and do that, getting off of Anthony Davis's large long-term salary. And then in this deal, you get this Miami first-round pick, which does have pretty severe protections on it, but then you're also getting your own first-round pick back. And remember, this was top 2 protected, this draft pick was. So with the top 2 protection here, if you're Charlotte, you say, well, that pick wasn't going to be at the very top of the draft for us anyway. And while, yes, Dallas is rebuilding, the 2027 draft doesn't look nearly as good as the 2026 class. I think this is a trade where Charlotte says we can kind of step forward, try and give our young guys some real meaningful minutes this year around Anthony Davis. I think he's a really good fit into what the Hornets already have with LaMelo and Kalkbrenner and Sion James and Con Knipple and everybody there. So this is a trade where it's kind of a little frisky and fun. You don't think about the Hornets as a buyer very often, but I actually do think kind of this sneaky move for Anthony Davis could be semi-sensible. Probably wouldn't do it, but I wanted to include it in the video. This trade with the Spurs is another one that I do think makes some sense because the opportunity cost here for San Antonio is relatively low. They've got some expiring salaries here. Another big part of the trade for Dallas, getting short-term money that they can get off of. In this case, Harrison Barnes returns to the Mavericks. Kelly Olynyk comes to Dallas as well. Keldon Johnson is the young player in this deal for the Dallas Mavericks, just 2 years left on his contract. Then you're getting some valuable 2026 second-rounders, this one via Utah, this one via either New Orleans or Portland. So you're looking at 2 extra top 40 picks in this year's draft. You're getting this Hawks pick unprotected next year. I already talked earlier about Trae Young not extending. Maybe you catch lightning in a bottle. The Hawks have a down year next year. Things just don't go right for them this offseason. Maybe that becomes a very valuable asset in the 2027 draft. Then you're also getting those swap rights in 2028, which gives Dallas just a tad bit more flexibility as well to work with in future trades and stuff. So the Mavericks here, they're not getting anything completely premium in this return for Anthony Davis, which again, I know Mavs fans are going to be very upset by. But let's be real about it. What team is going to trade blue chip premium stuff for Anthony Davis? The organization did not even get blue chip premium stuff for Luka Doncic. It's going to be way harder to do so for Anthony Davis given how much time he's missed and the continuation of the injuries for him throughout his career, and the fact that, again, in today's game, he just isn't that good of a jump shooter, and at a high volume, he doesn't shoot a high percentage. I do think that is very problematic. Now, the last one here is a lot of fun. Anthony Davis returns to Chicago, where he went to high school, and now for the Bulls, trying to make a bet on winning. This team plays with a ton of pace. They have Nikola Vucevic, who is one of the best stretch big men in the league with his play over the last couple of years. He's just been brilliant for Chicago. And Anthony Davis would fit in like a glove here with the Bulls. And there's a lot of things going on in this trade. The Mavericks get a lot of expiring salaries. Zach Collins, Kevin Huerter, Javon Carter, and Dalen Terry all expiring. So Dallas could quickly turn around, look to operate with cap space, try and improve their team drastically and very quickly over the next few seasons if they want to. And they get some decent stuff in here. They get Noah Senge, a lottery pick in 2025. Definitely someone who has some real tools and I think could flash in Dallas next to all the other length and size that they have. He'll be an interesting transition play finisher at the very worst for them. And then you get some picks here. This Portland pick has protections on it going forward, but you could get control of that. It's an asset to have carrying down the road, whether it's for trade value or flat out drafting yourself at some point in time when Portland does make the playoffs. And then you also get this year's top 5 protected Bulls pick, which, depending on how the Bulls season plays out, making a big trade like this, it could accelerate their winning, but it also could kind of throw a little bit of, mess into the mix where they try and figure out who they are now after Anthony Davis, and how does it mess with their system? How does it affect Billy Donovan's team? What happens to the Bulls? Sometimes making these big trades actually can derail a season for a team, and maybe that's what we would see happen here. And then maybe the Mavericks cash in with the top 10-ish pick from this, and they already have their own first-round pick. The Mavericks, if they do turn their eyes to the future, they could walk away in this draft with maybe one of Cam Boozer, Darren Peterson, AJ DeBonsa next to Cooper Flagg if they get lucky with their own pick again. And then maybe that Bulls pick this year, if things go right, could turn into a Bennett Sturts, could turn into a LeBaron Philon. There's definitely a lot of interesting players in the 2026 draft that could become for Dallas in the backcourt if they wanted to go that direction. So all in all, I think Chicago makes a big gamble here. They don't give up a lot of actual meaningful players. They do give up a Senge, who I know they just drafted, and a couple first-round picks. But to turn Zach Collins, Kevin Huerter, Javon Carter, and Dalen Terry's salaries into Anthony Davis is clearly a huge win for the Chicago Bulls as well. Hopefully you guys did enjoy. Make sure to send your own trade ideas down in the comment section below. Let me know what you thought about mine. Obviously, I was a little bit lower on the value for Anthony Davis compared to what many of you were probably expecting clicking into this video, but I hope my perspective is understandable, at least given the amount of time he misses every single season, and also some of my concerns about his overall play and the style of play that he has as a very poor high-volume jump shooter. Thanks again so much for watching. Hopefully you did enjoy. Leave a like and subscribe if you did, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.